One thing that can be surprising to people is the exploration of fear that is required in this whole awakening process. At different times, it comes in different forms, but I like to point out to people that at some point you're going to experience and come into contact with and have to navigate these really deeply seated existential fears, human fears. It's not an insight thing. It's not about no self-realization and non-duality and dependent origination and all the fancy schmancy stuff. And it's not a mystical thing. It's more of a gritty thing. But more importantly, it's something that's kind of locked away in the corridors of your psyche. It's something old in you. And as you listen to me, see if that doesn't stir something, if you can't maybe access at least the flavor of what I'm talking about. These are old energies. These are old fears. If you look at your life as it is right now, consider the functionality you have, or even lack of functionality in some areas, the things you do on a day-to-day basis, who you take yourself to be, how your relationships function, what kind of vocation you're taking part in, hobbies you may have, talents you may have, whatever. Just the whole gamut of aspects of your life in the conventional sense right now as it plays out. Noticing that there are certain personality structures, let's say. I'm not going to say identity structures, but there are certain personality structures that stabilize that, right? You know what it is to be an adult in the world you live in, right? In the life you live in. You know what it means for you to be an adult, to be a mature human and so forth. Now just back up a little bit. Feel into where these words point to what it is that came before that stabilizing into this adult world you live in. Maybe it's like an adolescent sort of energy, or the platform on which, or the scaffolding on which this way of moving through the world, conventionally speaking, that you're experiencing now is built on. Noticing the feeling of that has a different feel to it. Again, it could be adolescent energy. There could be some rebellion in it, some hope, some excitement about moving into the world with your newfound freedom, autonomy, and so forth. It could also be laced with some pain. Probably is. Maybe a lot of trauma. Who knows, right? But that adolescent energy it's like an earlier stage of development. It's an earlier stage of the development and propagation of your personality and the way you've moved through this world. And earlier than that, there's this kind of older child or pre-adolescent platform, right? That on which the others are built, or over which the others are built. And as you start to feel back through these, notice that in each phase, there are different kinds of emotional landscapes, right? Different kinds of fears, and how you dealt with those fears plays into this, right? So for instance, it's possible that we've had certain fears arise in childhood, and through, say, good parenting or good resources, we learned to navigate those fears with a kind of integrity, wholeness, through integration, through actually feeling, through understanding what goes into the fear, and having an accurate worldview around that which we're fearing. And it's just kind of a healthy approach to that, such that when we built the next scaffolding or the next platform of identity, it wasn't built defensively. It wasn't built as a defense mechanism against the earlier emotional landscape. Now, understand, that's the exception. For most people, that's not the case. It's certainly not across the board. For all of us, there's some aspects of using the next platform of identity, the next stage of life, the next personality structure aspect to, in some way, cover up or avoid the fears of the previous one. So what I'm saying is that at every stage of development, from being a toddler who's just starting to recognize the I am sense, the sense of just being anything, and then developing the sense of self and other and relationality and communication and theory of mind, realizing other people have an inner world and being able to manipulate that. Like all of those are developmental stages in childhood, and then becoming socially aware in adolescence and all that, right? Each of those stages has fears, starting with the very early fears of abandonment, right? Losing your primary bond, and then the fears in adolescence of humiliation, right? Not fitting in, being ostracized, all of it. All of those layers of fears, again, to some degree, actually don't get dealt with or even fully felt. They get covered up, swept under the rug by just building a scaffolding over it of the next identity structure. And again, sometimes there's trauma laced throughout all of this, or certain parts of it. So we have to go back and visit that. And it can feel gritty as hell when we go back and suddenly feel like a angsty teenager again, or a terrified child, or we won't want to go back to that. We don't want to feel like that terrified child, right? If we're really traumatized, a lot of times fear is the one thing we learned to turn off completely, right? Dissociate from. So anyway, the point of this is anyone can relate to the fact that it's, to some degree, we build these new identity structures or personality structures over the previous ones. Whereas the fears of a child, like darkness, sounds at night, being abandoned, things like that, we think we're beyond those fears. We're not actually beyond them. We've just built scaffoldings over them, and we moved into those new structures such that we just we have ways of ignoring those deeper fears. They're still there until they're not. But we can still access them. And to the degree that we don't want to see this, we have the potential to go unconscious, to enter a kind of unconscious behavior pattern, right? Because the point is they're there, and they do get triggered, and they do express. But if they express in a way that is so discordant with what we think we are, who we think we are, then we have this way of just overlooking it, just not noticing it. So it leaks out, right? This is why it's important to go back for this stuff. Now, what awakening does, deeper realization and so forth, it starts to just dismantle the whole scaffolding. That might sound great, but again, you can't hide from this stuff now. Now it's everything in the basement's up in the living room. It's all here, and you got to work through it. You got to work with it and deal with it. And that's why I talk about trauma work a lot. I talk about therapy, not therapy as much as I want to say trauma therapy, but trauma work, and I talk about shadow work, and I talk about deep shadow process, circling, various modalities, because you just have to do it. You know, you're going to be compelled to do it one way or another. So yeah, when it comes to fear, and this is what I started talking about here, what I find is that in those earlier stages, life stages, there's a couple of fears that are the most prominent, or maybe the root of other fears. And it's something like the one fear is the fear of not having the resources you need, right? And the first resource you need is a bond with a person who's going to take care of it. Without that bond, you will die, right? A baby, a brand new baby, a newborn, without the primary bond, in some form or another, will die. It won't be able to regulate its nervous system. It won't be able to keep warm. It won't be able to eat. It will die. It won't have protection in nature, right? So that primary bond is the first thing you need, right? And so that becomes a psychological need in the adult, but for the infant, it is a true physical somatic need, right? The need for a primary bond. So the first fear we have, in some sense, is the fear of losing that bond, the fear of abandonment, right? And it comes in other forms later, more complex forms. Most of us wouldn't be here. Well, none of us would be here if we had no bond at a young age. We had no one taking care of us at all. Then the baby won't live, right? We've all lived through that, but we may have had that bond disrupted at a very, very young age, and that's very difficult traumatically to go through, and takes a lot of work to restructure that and reconnect those pathways, but it can be done. And then the older we get, the more conscious those traumatic abandonment injuries become, the more we're consciously aware of them, because they're when we're forming memories and so forth. And also often what came before may have been a lot of stability, so it may not be quite as damaging of an injury, but this is mostly trauma, what I'm talking about. The point is, all of us have a fear of losing that bond. All of us have a fear of abandonment at those ages, every single one, right? As long as you know you're a self, or you believe you're a self, you feel separate, you feel like a one, you feel like a me, as long as that feels true, at some point, the recognition and that the other is mother or father or primary caretaker, there will be a recognition that that other could not be here. And you see it because sometimes they're not there, right? Mom can't always be there. Dad can't always be there. So we feel unregulated or cold or scared or lonely or hungry, and there's no one there to take care of us. So we can extrapolate pretty quickly, like, what if that one just completely doesn't come back? What if they disappear altogether? Or we have that happen, right? We may have become abandoned or by one parent. One parent's been killed or lost or leaves. This happens to many, many people. And in some form or another, we're all going to perceive the possibility of abandonment. And that's going to become a wound, right? It's going to become a fear. And pretty quickly, we usually learn to dissociate from that because of the complexity of consciousness. We can use imagination to dissociate. And one of the ways that we dissociate in a stable way that I talk about all the time is through thought identification, mind identification. That the world of mind identification, which is the world of human nature, which is the madness you see around you oftentimes in the human population, right? That is exactly what I'm talking about. That is scaffoldings over scaffoldings of identity structures built to avoid these deep fears. Number one, fear of abandonment. Number two, so fear of abandonment, I can broaden to the fear of losing or not having the resources you need. And this is important, and I'm not going to get into like a lot of detail, but also the states that you think you need, emotional states, which those are the somatic links to the resources, right? So yeah, those are the things. We're afraid of losing resources, that which we need and that which we think we need and that which nourishes us and that those states which we associate with all of that. That's what we're actually afraid of losing, right? That's one fear. The other side of it is actually something more like a fear of being stuck, right? Being stuck in a body, being stuck in a situation, being stuck in a circumstance, being stuck in sensations, being stuck in emotions, being stuck in pain and physicality. We have a strong resistance to this. Now, this one's an interesting one in that I think this actually forms probably before we form an identity. This is probably the older one, but I don't know for sure. But they're kind of the opposite, right? One is I don't have the resources I need. It causes us to cling and look outward and grasp, to hold on, not be able to let go. The other one's more like, oh God, I just want to push it away. I want to get away. I want to go into my inner world. Both of them actually, we learn to use an inner world to escape from, for sure. But this one's more like, I just want to back away from experience. I want to not feel. I want to push it away. I want to push emotion away. I want to push pain away. I want to push thought away. I want to imagine it's not there. I want to think of all the ways to get rid of it. That's all. And this comes in forms of like obsession about the way people eat and, obsessions about the way people exercise and body obsession and dissociation into these weird dream worlds that you can become invincible somehow by the way you eat and eating natural products all the time and all this. And, all this stuff happens, right? It's just delusion, but we want to ignore the fact that we are in this body, supposedly. It seems like we are, right? But whatever we're perceiving as I is seemingly linked to this body mind, and it's going to grow old, decompose, die, and it's rot in its grave, change forms, and so forth. We don't want to see that. We don't want to really digest that, right? And we also don't want to have to acknowledge, feel, and ultimately just let go of the control around the fact that being in this body comes with certain experiences, pains, sensations, etc. So you could say that these two types of fears and the reactions to them are kind of like the push and pull, the desire and aversion, right? But these are the fundamental fears, and we have to, at some point, come back and experience them, come back and navigate them. The fear of not having the resources you need, the states you need, and the fear of being stuck in a body, being stuck in sensations, emotions, and ultimately stuck in a set of conditions that this body will ultimately, that compels us to see and recognize that this body will ultimately collapse, break down, decay, die, and so forth, right? So it's like, one is like the fear of life, one is the fear of death, fear of living without the resources we need to live, and the fear of basically losing all resources, and feeling the pain of that loss. Now, this could sound all heavy and insurmountable and all this, but it's actually not. You can actually go back through all of it and address these two fundamental fears. But a big part of that is to feel the fear. And it may have been a long time since you've actually felt fear. It's not a long time since you've felt psychological fear, but I mean physical, physiologic, full-on fear may surprise you how intense it is, right? Now, some people certainly have recently, but many people I think live so dissociated that they don't feel a lot of what their body's experiencing, but there's this kind of ongoing low-level anxiety that happens because of that. So yeah, you're going to have to go back and feel this and then really see what the implications are of all of the coping mechanisms you've built around not feeling this. So it's not just feeling the fears, not just feeling the emotions, but also seeing the coping mechanisms that have been tied into you not wanting to feel them. And those will become dismantled at some point. So that may sound like some insanely difficult project, but it's not. It's something. I mean, it's got take some work, but it's doable for sure for you in this life in a reasonably short time, meaning a few years, handful of years. It's not going to happen with one awakening. I'll tell you that. It's also not going to happen with non-dual awakening either. But non-dual with a bunch of shadow work is really the key to this. So